I titled today's Neville Goddard Conversation Mind Map, Stop Surrendering Your Free Will to Information. Assume Ideal Instead. He says, you are not a helpless being, but the operant power of God. Seated as you are now, you can move without moving physically because your eternal body is all imagination. So like we discussed in a recent Neville conversation, you are aware. This awareness, which is you, is formless. And through the lens of your mind's eye, you can see the contents of eternity, which we call imagination. And from there, you can accept as true whatever you desire to prove God's power. What has then been imagined and accepted as true is then taken and projected out as our physical world. Or we can say, God does everything, animates everything through you as a bridge of incidents to revealing what you have imagined. And by through you, I'm referring to your physical self. So we close our eyes or not, it's really up to you. And imagine yourself being a certain way, which already exists in the eternal body of imagination. And the unseen power takes the contents of what you've accepted as reality, what you felt as real in your imagination, and externalizes it for you. Now, how does this unseen power work? Well, we're taught in Isaiah 55:9, for the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We want to keep it a consideration that the unseen ways cause body and everything to move, to fulfill as planned from what we have selected in imagination. And we see it here clearly. My thoughts are not your thoughts, which means how this personal self may believe it will happen is bias of how this personal self, which the contents of what this personal self believes, is stored in the subconscious mind. These contents, which are beliefs, are either allowing it to happen naturally or trying to control it to happen in a personally biased way. So this is really about a question of degree of faith in the unseen. Also, it's important to acknowledge that the more subtle the mind becomes, which means not bogged down with identification to separation from God-based beliefs, the more we hear God's thoughts. This is intuition. So when we see your ways versus my ways, it sounds like separation from God, which it's not. The illusion of separation from God is only caused by specific subconscious beliefs. And what are these beliefs? Well, they're revealed in what he says here. You and I move from state to state, either deliberately, by knowing what we are doing, or unintentionally, by falling into a state as we read the headlines of the paper, listen to the radio, or watch TV tonight. And although you may know none of the facts, if you accept what is said, you will fall into a state and by things you do not need. Now, I want to break this down today in two parts. Number one, why is it a person would unintentionally fall into a state by what he says, read the headlines of the paper, listen to the radio, or watch the TV tonight? And number two, what does a person do if they have unintentionally fallen into a state that they didn't consciously choose? Now, I love that he brought up read the headlines. For many years, I studied and applied direct response marketing, copywriting, and consultative selling, which I used to grow my IT business to success. And from 2013 to 2019, I actually worked with some of the biggest names and brands in the space. And if you're not familiar with these areas, they are all about effective communication that is designed to do a few things, as we used to say, AIDA, which means attention, interest, desire, and action, which means say things or write things in a way to capture the attention, which could include things like, you should stop doing this and do these other things instead, which also for fun I titled today's mind map, which from there, I captures interest, D inspires desire, and A inspires action. And this is seen nowadays on the internet, which inherently, there's nothing wrong with doing this, as this is how marketing occurs for businesses. When keeping Neville's information into consideration, in relation to what we desire, which by the way, over the years, from studying not only what he says, but how he says it, he knows how to communicate persuasively, and thus AIDA can be very helpful as this information has transformed many lives. What we want to be aware of is where we are surrendering our free will to when it comes to any information that one consumes, which from a belief inside brings them into an undesirable state. So it's not the information, but the belief assigned inside, the beliefs identified with. You see, if one does not embody mentally those subconscious beliefs, they will not be at the whim of what someone says or how they say it, but rather they will see the information for what it is, information. And from that depolarized observer perspective, choose lovingly what the information means. Now, let's say a person is polarized to information, and from there they start behaving in a different way, not true to how they truly desire to be. It's important at that point to not shame or condemn themselves, for if they do, they persist in shame and condemnation beliefs. And if they come across information like that, they could end up being polarized, and this can occur again and again as they move along the screen of space like a puppet to the tune of that state. So how does one stop this from happening? Well, first, it's the recognition of what they are imagining in relation to the information and accepting as true. That's what's causing the reactivation of an undesirable state. Remember, the eternal body is imagination, and there are infinite states already existing now, as Neville describes it, which I like to say everything already exists in imagination. And as all things are possible, it doesn't mean, nor is it advisable, to imagine just anything and accept it as true, because then you could end up believing unhelpful things and then ending up in undesirable states by reacting to those beliefs. And so how do we personally know what to imagine? Well, consider this. You can imagine unlovingly or lovingly. You have free will to choose any state that already exists. The question I like to ask is, what else comes along with this state? Am I willing to accept whatever else comes along with that state? And if still in doubt, I always suggest imagining lovingly, as Neville has said it as well. He said, when in doubt, always do the loving thing, which is to imagine lovingly. And we can do this wherever we are. Anything that implies, for ourselves or another, as love, as this is the desire of the heart, and not past beliefs which could be confused to be desire. So simply put, go within and ask yourself, what do you love? Your spiritual self speaks to you through the language of desire, as he says here. The spiritual self speaks to the natural self through the language of desire. The key to progress in life and to fulfillment of dreams lies in ready obedience to its voice. Unhesitating obedience to its voice is an immediate assumption of the wish fulfilled. To desire a state is to have it. So this is about honoring what you desire. Your spiritual self always knows what you want to experience. Beyond this world made up of past beliefs And with your spiritual self, you know what to choose to have the life you want, which already exists in imagination. What we really want is to commit to and enjoy what we desire, which is not to be confused by beliefs based on undesirable fight or flight responses, which we discussed in Thursday's video. I'll link in the description to it. What we're interested in here is the desires of the spiritual self, which are distinct from those beliefs. Which again, let's go back to the quote here, where he mentions it. He said, "You and I move from state to state, either deliberately, by knowing what we are doing, or unintentionally, by falling into a state as we read the headlines of the paper, listen to the radio, or watch TV tonight. And although you may know none of the facts, if you have accepted what is said, as in you have a choice, if you have accepted what is said, you will fall into a state and buy those things you don't need." So I'm not interested in what the information on TV, internet, paper, or radio, which through past beliefs that I was once identified with inside, was stimulating. And I mean literally, I'm not interested. As in, I have discovered those past beliefs that seem to confuse the desires of the spiritual self. And that's up to you to decide. And what I'm interested in personally is what the spiritual self desires. The spiritual self brought me into the 10-year corporate career in IT. The spiritual self took what I learned there, and then I had a desire from the spiritual self to start an IT business, which I grew to success from 2009 to 13. The spiritual self then inspired me to start this YouTube channel in 2013, while I was also involved with other initiatives in consulting, which also combined what I learned from my 10 years in corporate, including my IT business, and brought into consulting, which then from 2019, I focused exclusively to all that is related to this channel. These were desires of my spiritual self, and we all have access to these desires. If I was listening to past beliefs that were not true, I would have gone down a different pathway. And although that might have been helpful, because if you go down a different pathway, you somehow realize what you truly desire. So in a way, one could experience undesirable states from which then they know what is a desirable state, only to bring them back to listening to the spiritual self. The spiritual self is love, and thus desires love, and desires all that is related to love. And so we know when it's the voice of mental chatter, past beliefs, or the voice of our heart and intuition. And we become aware of this by asking the question, am I desiring this because I'm reacting to this information and interpreting that this is what I should desire? And what is it that I truly desire? And a simple inquiry like this can be helpful to discern. Now, the same is to be said on the journey to realizing your desire. You are now aware to a higher degree if free will has been surrendered to information which is not true and in harmony with how you truly desire to be, which is being from your vision. And if you find yourself being undesirably reactive, you can disentangle your mind from the evidence of your senses, which more accurately put is a specific belief in mind in relation to the information which we do not want to perpetuate, which by taking our attention away from it, and by this it's meant observe without reacting, or observe in your mind's eye how you imagine it to be ideally. As you do, you remain in your ideal state of consciousness and go on with your life, as he says here. To cultivate the faculty of seeing the invisible, we should often deliberately disentangle our minds from the evidence of the senses and focus our attention on an invisible state, mentally feeling it and sensing it until it has all the distinctness of reality. Earnest, concentrated thought focused in a particular direction shuts out other sensation and causes them to disappear. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You can say, I am aware of how I relate with information, and I relate to it from the premise of fulfilled desire, as my vision is fact, which this world of the past is rearranging now to reflect how I truly desire it to be. From this awareness, I know what I want, and I also know it's done unto and through me by the unseen power within me as an effortless, flow-based path to realizing my vision in love and spirit of harmony with all. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.